38 Special Snub Nose. What's the best ammunition you can carry in these little 2-inch barrel guns here? And my example I have here is actually a 357 Magnum Taurus 605 revolver. And I actually have tested rounds side by side with this versus a Smith & Wesson J-frame and got basically identical velocity. So the fact that I've done a lot of testing out of this 357 snub isn't going to make any difference in what I'm going to share as what I think are the best 10 loads that you can carry in a snub nose revolver in 38 Special. So I've done a lot of ballistic testing, so yeah, I've gathered a lot of information over the years on what's good in 38 Special. So I compiled a list of the top 10 best performing rounds, or ones that people would consider carrying. But you know, down the list I think they get better and better. And this isn't going to be a list completely 100% based on, you know, what's the performance, you know, what has the biggest expansion, what has the deepest penetration. And the reason for that is because, you know, some of this ammunition is not easy to just go to a store and find. So yeah, I don't want to list stuff that's like really hard to come by or has to be found online. And that brings me to another point. A lot of people have been asking for an updated list of this, and I've been kind of putting it off, but recently YouTube deleted my original version of this, and they said that I was trying to facilitate the sale of ammunition, even though I did not list any prices. I did not list where you can find the stuff. So I want to make a mention of that here. I am not trying to facilitate the sale of ammunition or show where you can buy this stuff. I will have no links, nothing like that. I'm just going to talk about the performance I've had of this ammunition in short barrels. So the results I came up with are based on my ballistic gel test, where I use a 1/4 inch medium density 5 board as a rib simulation in my clear ballistic test. I don't like using organic gel simply because it takes a lot of work to develop that, and then, you know, I have to bring it way out to where I shoot and all that. Just a big mess there. So what I do is I use clear ballistics, and I use a 1/4 inch medium density fiber board as a rib simulation. And I personally think that that's a better medium than just plain gel, just because, you know, while gel is supposed to calculate, you know, bones and everything in to change the penetration, what it doesn't account for is when a bullet will hit ribs, it will sometimes not expand, sometimes it will fragment, and it significantly changes the size of that bullet, which is going to in turn significantly change the actual penetration you got. So I use rib simulation because I think it's more realistic of the penetration you would get through an actual living target. And in addition to that, what I'm going to say here is ballistics gel is roughly a half representation of the density of real flesh. So if you're talking, you know, you get 12 inches in a gel block, that's actually like more like you got 6 inches in an actual living target. So just keep that in mind there. And there is a minimum of 12 inches that the FBI wants to see. I don't put a whole lot of stock in that, simply because part of that came about because there's a lot of, you know, this is the 1986 Miami shootout. That was kind of the start of it. But there's a lot of this in law enforcement where there's a bad guy running from a cop and shooting back, and the only shot an officer has is back this way. So you want to get at least, you know, 6 to 7 inches in an actual living target to be able to hit something vital. And, you know, in order to calculate that in gel, that's like 12 inches. As a civilian concealed carrier, someone that's going to be carrying a 38 Special snub nose, it'd be exceedingly rare for that to be a need. So most of your shots are going to be front on shots. Honestly, you only need, you know, 4 or 5 inches in a body, which is 8 to 10 inches in gel. But I'll digress on that. But let's start with our list here. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, and that is your Remington, UMC, or HTP, whether that be your 158 grain lead hollow point plus P, or your 110 or 125 grain semi-jacket hollow point. I have some information of that, what I got with those. The HTP 110 grain plus P, 1,018 feet per second, 253 foot-pounds. What I got through our MDF shot, or real world simulation shot as I like to call it, with our rib simulation, 13 3/4 inches of penetration, and the expansion of 0.525. So not quite 1.5 times expansion, but that's really good performance for a cheap ammunition. It's just that I think some of this ammo ammo performed a little bit better, and it's not as mainstream as what a lot of people want to see. The HTP 158 grain lead hollow point, what I got with that is 805 feet per second, 227 foot-pounds energy on average through our real-world simulation. 17 inches of penetration, but only a 0.471 expansion. So that's just our honorable mention there. Something that you can get locally usually, and it's cheap. But now let's start with our test. Now I'm going to start with number 10, and I'm going to say our Underwood Extreme Defender with the 100 grain fluted bullet. I really didn't want to include this because I don't think that it does that well, but a lot of people would go crazy if I didn't include this, because the common thought is, well, if you got a round like this, 38 Special usually doesn't get expansion, which this list is going to prove that wrong. 38 doesn't usually get expansion through a short barrel, so you might as well get something like this because you're going to get as much damage as the hollow point, and you don't have to worry about expansion. And I'm going to say off bat, that's not true. There was a 2016 to 2017 joint agency ballistic test, and it's kind of a top secret thing, and it doesn't even show the agencies that were involved, but there's like a sanitized version online you can find, and they did test some Extreme Defenders, and what they found was, yes, Extreme Defenders have some of the largest permanent wound cavities, better than some jacketed hollow points, etc., etc. But it was only doing that when you were like hitting velocities of like 1,500 feet per second, plus with a light for caliber bullet. Not even anywhere near that with this. What I got with the Extreme Defender in my testing was I got 1,048 feet per second, 244 foot-pounds energy. So what I ended up getting was, through my MDF rib simulation, 13.5 inches of penetration with no expansion, and there was definitely some evidence of tumbling because I saw a tumbling size hole going through the MDF. So that's really kind of a secret why it doesn't penetrate very far, because it's light and it starts to tumble. And the damage I saw in there just wasn't all that good. So I honestly cannot recommend it, but a lot of people do seem to like that. So the next one on our list of number 9 is going to be our Federal Punch. And this isn't bad ammo, and it's really inexpensive ammo. It's easy to find, shoots pretty well, but it just didn't perform all that well. What I got with that, the Federal Punch, 937 feet per second average, and I'm quoting all these velocities from this gun. 937 feet per second average, 234 foot-pounds energy, and that is a 120 grain and is a plus P, which that is good power and everything. But what we got through my rib simulation was 15.5 inches of penetration. That's good, but the expansion was only 0.427. So just not that good overall, to be honest. So let's move on to our number 8 here. And what I got here is our Federal Hydra-Shok Deep, our 130 grain plus P. Not bad performing overall. But what I got going on with our Hydra-Shok Deep, it's a 130 grain plus P, 841 feet per second average, which is kind of low, 204 foot-pounds energy. Through my rib simulation, I only got 10 3/4 inches of penetration, but the expansion was 0.601. It just wasn't very consistent expansion. So half those pedals did come out to 0.601. So honestly, I would say that that's not bad, because like I was saying, with most people carrying a 38 SNUB are not going to be needing a lot of the needs that law enforcement carry. I think that 10 3/4 inches would be fine, but I know that a lot of people are not going to be happy with that low number of penetration. So I put it at number 8 on that list. Number 7, we moving right along to our regular Hydra-Shok in the 110 grain. There's a it's a 129 grain plus P is the plus P version, but the standard pressure in my testing has done better. It actually has more energy than the plus P out of a snub nose barrel. So what I got going on with that is 898 feet per second, 197 foot-pounds energy, which isn't bad for a standard pressure. And I got 13 3/4 inches of penetration, 0.509 on our expansion. So just a little bit smaller than 1.5 times expansion with really good penetration. So honestly, that's not a bad choice overall for number 7. I definitely would recommend that because it does have less recoil. So if you're looking for a low recoil option, that's a good option too. And also, we could mention like wad cutters and whatnot. Those are good options, but honestly, they're not what I would consider good performance. They're just better than lead round nose and stuff like that. But they're not anywhere near as good as the jacket of hollow points on this list. So let's move on to number 6 here. What I got going on here is our Buffalo Bore standard pressure 158 grain lead hollow point. And that actually performed really, really well for a standard pressure. What we got going on there with that, with our Buffalo Bore, with our standard pressure out of that gun, 916 feet per second average, 294 foot-pounds energy. So that's powerful. That's more powerful than a lot of 9mm out of 3-inch barrels. And what I got going through my real-world simulation is 12 inches of penetration and 0.622 expansion. That's massive. And we got our minimum penetration we want to see through a rib simulation. And the recoil wasn't excessive. So that is one of the best performing rounds. But, you know, it still does have more recoil than most rounds, and it is a lead bullet, so it is kind of smoky. Now, moving on to number 5 here. I'm going to include 2 things here. The Buffalo Bore and the Underwood 158 grain lead hollow point at a plus P pressure. These things were really, really, really powerful. I'm going to include them together because they are so similar. And what we got going on there with those is with the Buffalo Bore and the Underwood here. The Underwood I got 999 feet per second average, 350 foot-pounds through our MDF, 12 3/4 inches with an expanded diameter of 0.628. So good, very, very good. A lot of power, 350 foot-pounds, 12 3/4 inches of penetration, almost 63 hundredths of an inch diameter. That's really, really good. The Buffalo Bore version, a little bit more powerful, 1,060 feet per second, 394 foot-pounds energy. That's about as powerful as most 357 Magnums do that. So it is a little bit of a handful. We got 14.5 inches of penetration and 0.621 expansion. So that is a really, really good round overall. It's just that, you know, because it's not a jacketed bullet, it's really smoky and the recoil is really excessive. And if we're going to simplify this, it's kind of like a 357 Magnum in a 38 case. I mean, it's not, the pressures aren't like that because it is a lead bullet, but performance-wise, recoil-wise, kind of is. So it's hard for me to realistically recommend that as a great round, but very, very powerful rounds. So number 4 is going to be our Speer Gold Dot. Speer Gold Dot did pretty well. What we got with our Gold Dot, and you know, this is getting into stuff that's a little bit more commercially available, our Gold Dot. And this is our Gold Dot short barrel, 135 grain plus P. What I got with that is 898 feet per second on average, 242 foot-pounds energy. The plain gel shot, it got really big expansion, but I'm not going to include that. But through our MDF shot, through our rib simulation, 12.5 inches of penetration with an expanded diameter of 0.485. So the expansion wasn't great, but it's been very consistent for me and a very easy to control round. So just very low recoil, easy to shoot, commercially available. Really good performance, just a little bit low on our expansion, but it still gets consistent expansion. And I will mention that through plain gel, it got 588 diameter. And, you know, Gold Dots typically get a lot smaller going through my real world simulation through the MDF. So that's a typical thing to get, you know, something down in the, 40-ish caliber, 485. So that's pretty typical, but I would say overall, easy to find, good performance overall with our Gold Dot. Number 3 here, this is going to be probably surprising to a lot of people, and it surprised me. Our Winchester Defender. This used to be called the PDX-1. So this is our 130 grain plus P. And what I got going on with that Defender, I got some pretty good performance overall. So our Defender here, we got 926 feet per second on average, 247 foot-pounds energy out of that gun. So that's really powerful. It's not, low, and it's not super high. It's right in the middle, right around that 250 foot-pounds, easy to control recoil. Now with this, I only got 10 inches through our MDF, so that's kind of shallow. But what it made up for with that is 0.583 expansion. It's a very consistent expansion all the way around. So honestly, 10 inches in gel, that's 5 inches in an actual living target. That's more than enough penetration for the needs of a concealed carrier that's not taking shots with somebody that's shooting back at them through a side shot. And that performed really, really well and was easy to shoot. So our next two here, this is weird. Our next two, one is not super commercially available, but it is probably, I would say, the best possible round that you could get in 38 Special through a snub nose. The best performance I've ever seen. And number one has a little bit less performance, but I've tested it a whole bunch of times, a lot more than this number two, and it's continued to perform, and it is very commercially available. It's almost everywhere. So that's going to take my number one because of that. But our number two had the best performance out of all the different rounds that I have tested. And what that is going to be is our Buffalo Bore 38 Special Plus P, lead-free, 110 grain TAC XP. This performed phenomenal. What I got with that is 1147 feet per second, 321 foot-pounds energy. And because it's only a 110 grain bullet, and because the bullet is long and deep in that case, there's just not a lot of muzzle blast. There's not a lot of recoil. It stayed feeling like a 38 Special. But yet we were 321 foot-pounds energy. Going through our rib simulation, 15.5 inches of penetration with an expanded diameter of 0.602. So just fantastic performance. You know, everything about the low recoil, the low flash, you know, easy to control, perfect performance out of a 2-inch barrel. You just can't get better than that. You just can't. But I can't list it as my number one because it's unlikely a person's going to walk into their average gun store and be like, hey, I want this. You're not going to be able to find it. So that's going to stay at number two. But if you have the opportunity to carry that, I would recommend that. Everything about that is really fantastic. Now, our number one choice, and I've had this as my number one choice for a long time, and it's still here. That's our Hornady Critical Defense 110 grain plus P. And the reason why is because I've tested it so many times. It's continued to remain super consistent. You can find it everywhere. It just continues to perform the same, almost the same, from every time I test it. And I've tested it probably 24 times. There might be once or twice where I had some anomalies where it wasn't that great, where maybe the expansion with one shot didn't quite work out. But the number of those bullets that I put through gel or through water jugs or through baloney packs or whatever it might have you, and it continues to perform really, really well, always. So the last test I did on this, I got 951 feet per second on average, 221 foot-pounds energy. That's very consistent with what I normally get. That is a 110 grain bullet. Going through our rib simulation, I only got 10 3/4 inches of penetration, so a little bit low, but it consistently does that from test to test to test. Expanded diameter of 0.523, just a hair less than that 1.5 times expansion we want to see, but very, very close. So I would say out of all the rounds that you can just go and pick up, you know, if you're going to go to a store that has a lot of different ammo, you know, these Hydra-Shoks, the Punch, and then these three are ones you're probably going to find. So you're likely to find those pretty easily. But none of those performed all that well. You're likely to find all of these commercially. But out of all of these three, even though these did pretty good, this is the one that consistently does better overall. So, you know, that's just my results with these rounds here. You know, it's surprising because a lot of people say, well, I have a 2-inch barrel and 38 Special, you will not get expansion. That's never been my experience. In fact, everything I listed here had expansion. And, you know, a dozen things I went through that I didn't list had expansion. It's just, you know, they either severely underpenetrated or the expansion wasn't that great. As where all of these had a little bit of everything good going on. So, Critical Defense, still our number one, but if I had to recommend one, Go for that Buffalo Bore TAC XP if you can find it. So interesting here. That's what you get today with my new list. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.